expression, we realized that this is a very hot discussion because everybody was in the panels of freedom of expression bringing the subject of gender, and in the panels of gender bringing the subject of freedom of expression. So we've discussed some of the issues of this panel a few times, and I hope that we can profit from having a specific time to just discuss the relation between these two subjects here. This morning we had the BPF, Online Abuse and Gender-Based Violence Against Women, and as you may know, because of this process, the UN and the Take Back the Tech campaign have been under attack, precisely because they would be favoring censorship, sorry. So this makes this debate even more urgent now. I think there are several different paths that this discussion can take, and I hope we can address some of them here, be it legal discussions such as intermediary liability, or whether legal solutions are desirable at all, or if we can think of a single discussion or breaking into online several violences, or even that we can go more concrete so that we know exactly what we're talking about. So let us go straight to our panelists. I'm going to very briefly introduce them to you, and then I'm going to ask them all to speak for 5 minutes each so that we can open to the floor for your questions and for remote questions as well. Ana de Freitas, she's a journalist from Brazil who recently went through a case of harassment herself because of being vocal about sexism. Bia Barbosa, she's a member of Intervozes Brazil, and she will speak about some examples in which this contradiction shows itself. Daphne Plu, she's an APC member who has been working for long now with violence against women, and who I immensely thank for all the help in organizing this panel, Daphne. Erica Smith is part of the Take Back the Tech campaign from APC. Erica. Gabrielle Guillemin works for Article 19. Sorry if I misspoke your name. And will speak of what violence against women means from a free speech perspective. And Hiba Hussain is a public policy analyst at Google and will speak of the company's policies and how they see the intersection. And Paz Peña from Derechos Digitales will speak of the adequateness or not of legal measures. So we'll start with Daphne, please.
Yes, thank you. And I want to refer directly to research we did and with a project that has to do with violence against women online, tech-related violence. And we've been working with this project since 2012 till now. And we decided to have a map online, a Ushahidi map, you know, it's a software, a free software map, that where we are mapping cases from different parts of the world to really see what's going on and where is it going on. And suddenly we saw that things were going on everywhere. So we found this very challenging, and the need then to analyze what was coming out of all these cases that were being mapped there. In this project, we are working with 7 different countries in different regions, and that's why we were also able to collect all this information from different parts of the world. And what we saw in this map on the cases, and we are analyzing here about 400 cases that are mapped there. You can go and look at the map afterwards if you want to. We found that there were 3 main groups that were being targeted and were being victims of online violence against women. And when we categorized them, we saw that the main group had to do with someone involved in an intimate relationship. A second group was a professional involved in public expression, and this involves activists, journalists, writers, researchers, musicians, actors, anyone with a public profile or interest in public exchange. And then another group that we found has to do with survivors and victims of physical assault. So, coming to the situation, we see what is at stake. With the first group, someone involved in an intimate relationship, we see that what is there has to do with intimacy and trust. And what happens? It involves the use of ICTs for private expression, the content of which is being exploited publicly by someone who was intimately involved with the person, with the woman. Um, and the consequences, they can result in extreme consequences. We've seen suicides because of this, and probably you've read about them on the press. And widespread sense of shame may require severe actions such as changing name, changing address, sometimes also changing jobs, leaving school or university, and so on. And then the possible attitude towards ICTs following the incident, we see a lack of trust in technology, withdrawal from using technology for intimate exchange and expression, and shame because of original use of ICTs, and so they retreat from online spaces. So we really see a problem there that has to really do with freedom of expression online and offline too. With the second group, as I said before, it's professionals often involved in public expression and the whole list of them. We see that what is at stake is the freedom of expression, self and political. And what happens? There's harassment, threats, silencing through verbal abuse. And this is going on a lot. People really don't want to write anymore, don't want to speak anymore. They just want to withdraw from any media. And the consequences typically appears to result in less extreme consequences for the victim, given the public status. A greater sense of empowerment to remedy the situation may happen, but still, many of them lose their jobs, they have to change from the place where they live, and the reputation is also harmed. Perhaps they can sort of overcome it after a while, but the situation can be really difficult. And what happens towards technology? These women start using more carefully technology. They see it as a potential and proactive tool for remedy of rights violated, and they might engage with technology as a tool for public expression and sharing also of what happened to them. So we see that many of them don't leave technology aside as in first group. And then what happens to survivors of our victims of physical assault? Their physical safety is at stake. It involves direct crime, such as filming a gang rape, and this has happened in many countries, and can result in extreme consequences, such as suicide of the person violated. And so they are psychologically and socially affected, and this evidence that is still going on the internet, as we know, it's very difficult to accompany them so that they can take down the information there, and we know all that comes after it, no? And of course, they don't want to see anything that has to do with technology for a long time. So there's a lot to do to working with them so that they can tell the stories, they can share this potential harm with others, and they can also overcome their situation. So we see through what we mapped and all these cases that freedom of expression is really curtailed for these women, no? And that the effects can be very negative, and there's a lot to do. We think that as a women's rights program, we have worked a lot so that these women can come again online, you know, and feel safer, and also be able to share and look for remedies together with us. This is not always possible because of so many cases around the world, but with the 7 partners we have in different countries, we're working hard on this so that we really get results, not only on the legal side, but also on the personal side, that has to do with these survivors. So this will be it.
Thank you very much, Daphne, for presenting data about the researchers. That's very enriching. So I'll give the word to Gabrielle.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to apologize to anyone who was there on Monday, as it may sound familiar. What I'd like to do today is mainly 3 things. One, I'd like to talk about the framework that we use as an international free speech organization under the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights. Second, I'd like to raise some issues around definitions when we talk about online violence and different forms of speeches. And thirdly, hopefully if there's enough time, talk a little bit about the responsibility of internet intermediaries. So, first looking at the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. Freedom of expression is a fundamental right, but we also know that it's not absolute. It can be restricted, and it can be restricted first under three conditions. First, the restriction must have a basis in law. Second, it must pursue a legitimate aim. Usually among those aims there's the prevention of crime. It would be relevant in this context, sometimes also the protection of morals. And thirdly, it must be necessary and proportionate in a democratic society. Now, it doesn't stop here. Article 22 of the International Covenant also mandates states to prohibit incitement to hostility, violence, and discrimination on a number of discriminatory grounds. Now, if I go back to what I was discussing earlier about restrictions which are permitted, they have to have a basis in law. That means that they must be sufficiently precise. So when we're talking about online violence against women, there's a question that arises about what do we mean by violence online. Traditionally, particularly when looking at incitement to violence, for instance, at least from a free speech perspective, we've understood violence as the likelihood of physical violence occurring rather than psychological. Now, if we turn to different forms of speeches, I think generally speaking, you could say that International Free Speech Organization would recognize that if we're talking about harassment, and if harassment was criminalized, for instance, there would probably be a legitimate restriction on freedom of expression. Now, online, other issues arise, and our understanding of harassment can be challenged because, for instance, on Twitter, sometimes an individual might receive one tweet from, say, 1,000 individuals, and these tweets are very offensive, and the person may consider that they feel harassed. However, that form of harassment may not fall within existing definitions. But from our perspective on the freedom of expression, if you consider that it's just one person making one remark, even if that remark is merely grossly offensive, it shouldn't be criminalized. And the state shouldn't be trying to go after the 1,000 different people just for that one tweet, even though, unfortunately, for the person concerned, they might still feel very aggravated. And that leads me to an important point from a free expression perspective, is that free expression also protects speech which may be deeply distasteful and offensive to others. And I think that's where the difficulties arise, because people have a different understanding of what may be permissible. Now, I just want to briefly touch on the responsibility of intermediaries. 2 minutes. So I think from a free speech perspective, a criminal liability would be a disproportionate restriction. In practice, we don't see such extreme measures so much. However, intermediaries can be held liable if they fail to take certain actions under the laws of various countries. And now I think that although we could generally accept that intermediaries may be compelled by a court order, for instance, to remove content which is unlawful, I think where we have some difficulties is when there's a push for intermediaries to do more, to have a positive obligation, for instance, to monitor content. That we see as a danger for free expression, particularly when it's not clear what sort of language we're talking about, or when, for instance, violence online is not well defined. So I'll just finish with one more remark, and it's about anonymity. It's also a big topic in this area, and the need for the protection of anonymity, not only to enable people for trolling, because unfortunately that's also a sad reality of the internet, but at the same time recognizing its importance for expression. And we hear a lot of groups who tell us how it's very important to them that their anonymity is protected. It's a mean for them to express viewpoints that people in their own communities might not agree with. So I just like to raise this as also a very important issue, and I look forward to discussing it with the rest of the panel and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. I'll pass the word now to Erica from Take Back the Tech.
You have to have a hot finger. Good afternoon, everyone. Se prende. Yeah. Gracias. I've been tasked with just telling you very briefly about what happened with the Take Back the Tech case, but I'm not sure what you're seeing, so no, that's not what I want you to see. Although it's very interesting, I'm sure. I think, anyway. What you're seeing is perhaps not a... Yeah, I want to go back one if we can. It's not respond. Where do I focus this at? Somebody's got to control. Can you go back? Perfect. Thank you very much. Just very quickly. So Take Back the Tech, companies of 16 days of action against gender-based violence. It's been, it started in 2006. It was before social networks were hot all over the world. It's basically a campaign that's been developed first starting with APC, but by campaigners all around the world, and very specifically throughout Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And it has led to things like documenting on the map that Daphne talked about, for example, and many other initiatives, mostly to a great deal offline, and women experimenting, exploring, developing tech and other ways and looking at digital security, but really questioning issues of violence against women connected and related to technology. So the campaign accompanies a very famous, long-held campaign throughout the world against gender-based violence, but it wants to do it in a fun and creative way, and it definitely doesn't want technology to be demonized in that process. So we played a very important role as part of APC in talking about the best practice form on countering abuse, because we feel just a little bit passionate about the internet and our right to play and speak and be in this space and multiple spaces and how it's understood. So, and we have been told for a long, long time that it's not our space, and the way that that gets told to us varies dramatically. That's why we got involved with the best practice forum. So we've been doing a lot of work around it, but we wanted to also invite other inputs, people who aren't necessarily aware about the best practice forum and internet governance. What's this strange animal? And so we got together around a Twitter chat where we were inviting people from all over the world to participate and talk, and they decided as a group in this process, transparent process, you know, everything up on that IGF site, you can consult, you can see the video conversations, you can see the transcripts. It's all about transparency. We like that. So those people decided, and we, to use the Take Back the Tech hashtag. It's been used for a long time. It's not that we own it, it's a hashtag. But it's been used in this vein for many years. So some people who say they're part of the Gamergate club, we are supposing mostly in the United States, decided that they were very upset about this UN organization called APC, who obviously has enough funds to control the world, who was really calling for global censorship of men's voices. And they decided to have, in fact, what we wanted was to shut down anonymity. In fact, all feminists can't listen to any sort of criticism, and basically attack the conversation. And the initial dialogue and messages were amusing in their ignorance and ridiculousness about the IGF, about transparency. It's like, oh my God, this website has everything published on it with no controls, say the guys in their Chan chats. But what they were able to do was send, in just under 24 hours, and a very small group of people and accounts, but lots of bots, over 25,000 tweets. That kind of makes it difficult to have a conversation with the hashtag, right? We did. We went ahead and had that. And as you know, once you set something out there, escalation can happen. And as there were different parts of it, it did escalate from those sort of, clouding messages and, the same old, to, much more intense misogyny, definitely generalized threats around the hashtag, and then direct threats, definitely Muslim xenophobia, definitely rape threats, sexualized images, all the things that, and of course, feminazi was right away inserted. There was also an expose video with information from the BPF process, the best practice forum process. They even infiltrated the public meeting saying they were reported from The Guardian in South Africa. Some, little white man's voice from the United States saying, I'm a reporter from The Guardian in South Africa, with a U.S. accent. They got to the point, however, and I think this is important, they took the time, and a lot of it, not only to make the videos and all of these things, to put together with other people, but there was a total of 98 comments on an IGF paper, on the best practice forum paper. And I think anyone here at the IGF can say, wow, that was impressive feedback. And of course, all of those have to be taken seriously and looked at and analyzed, and we did. And that's why it's such a transparent and informative process. There was also an attempt at a brute force attack on the IGF site, and other fallout on other spaces and other places that we occupy. I think that probably this particular attack didn't get much traction because, some people were like, hey, wait a minute, you're saying they're not in favor of freedom of expression, but look at, they're part of the Internet Rights Charter. So it was confusing even for some of the Gamergate community about why. So, but when they let us know very nicely that they were about to, ruin our lives, literally, they wrote us a letter. For us, it's different, right? Take Back the Tech campaign has existed. It's made up a whole bunch of different women's rights activists, people who are concerned about digital security, who have varying levels of digital security practice, but they're informed. APC, has its sights behind deflect. There's different levels of security in our network. So what this type of an attack means for us is really different than if it's on one single women's rights organization, an abortion rights group, if it's on a particular woman, a journalist. It's a very different reality to have to deal with 25,000 tweets. And I'm not saying that this was a minimalist attack, and I'm not saying that there were not threats and there were not aspects that were very violent to this, but it was different, again, because of the context and who it was against, and because of the incredible solidarity that we received from Take Back the Tech campaigners, from different parts of the internet rights and internet communities, but mostly from women's rights organizations. So it's a whole different reality than I think what a lot of women who are individually facing this sort of violence have to deal with. I think also that the fact that we as campaigners responded from everywhere in the world in many different languages, because that's what Take Back the Tech is all about, was very confusing for these people. Oh, they're speaking. And so this was something they were not also used to, which is why we assume they're based in the US. But I think our biggest concern was people were supposed to be in a chat where they were supposed to be talking about experiences they knew about, and how safe were they going to be from doxing? How much were their privacy configurations up to speed? And that was why we were really concerned that people would get outed and attacked. And in fact, many people who wrote to us privately about solidarity said, we can't participate because we're concerned about that too. But interestingly, a lot of people said, we can't participate because frankly, we don't have time to deal with this, and we don't really think it's worth investing the effort to deal with jerks like this. And other aspects. Of course, we had back channels, encrypted, secure channels, other strategies that were involved. But I think that it's important to say, when we saw this happen, and it's very linked to everything that Gabrielle said that what we really echo with, is, we weren't reporting these people, oh, this awful person who sent me, this huge erect penis in anime and has said, well, how about a surprise butt fuck? It's on the Take Back the Tech hashtag. It's not a direct threat. We didn't necessarily report, but many of our followers were reporting, and some who were individually engaging were getting direct threats and harassment, and they were also reporting. And so the mechanisms were working in some cases. A lot of that stuff was absolutely removed by the internet intermediary. So that affects documentation, and I think this is one of the key things. It's hard to do. and understand about those takedowns. You know, can our internet intermediary let us know? Well, how much did you have to take down because of this particular attack? These are the sorts of things that we would like to hear more about. And I just want to say, and this is not just a freedom of expression issue, it's about a lot of rights, and what happens is because it happens online, it gets framed as if it's only a freedom of expression issue. That is the topic, however, of this session, but I think it's really important that it is not a session about violence against women online versus freedom of expression. And when you use that word versus, you're going to get a hell of a lot of pissed off feminists.
Thank you so much, Erica. That's so helpful, especially because I think this Take Back the Tech case is kind of a showcase, because the whole idea of discussing violence against women online was being labeled as being anti-freedom of expression. So I think it I don't know, adds a lot to this discussion of not being one thing versus the other. I will now give the microphone to Anna.
You hear me? Yeah? Okay. I'd like to start telling you my story and the reason I'm here. I've been working as a journalist, as a reporter for a little over 10 years now. For the past 3 years as a freelance journalist, pitching stories about mostly digital culture technology. And earlier this year, specifically in February, I was working with one of my main editors, meaning I would be publishing 2 to 3 stories a week at this publisher. And I pitched to them a story, an article about how and why online boards related to pop culture, that being comics, movies, games, music, and internet culture in general, are very hostile to women presence and minorities in general. I wrote from my own experience as a teenager when I used to try to take part at this online spaces, but I also interviewed men and women who were also users of these kind of spaces and were also witnesses of this kind of violence against women and minorities. I wrote the article. My editor, she praised the quality of the article. She said she liked it. 2 days later, she got back to me and she said they weren't going to publish it. They didn't want that kind of attention. They even tried to talk me out of publishing it somewhere else. Then I took some time thinking about it, but then I decided to go along with it. I mean, with the original idea of publishing it. So I talked to another friend of mine, editor at another publisher, it's Brazil Post, which is the local Huffington Post. They published that. The article had a huge repercussion, much bigger than I actually expected. Most people were surprised that that kind of violence that I was reporting happened to women on these spaces that way, and a lot of them were supporting the fact that I decided to talk about it. But then I immediately started to get threatened. So I got hundreds of rape threats, murder threats on my social network profiles, on different online spaces. So there were threads on boards that were only about me, hundreds of posts with pictures of me. They would track the events I would confirm on Facebook. They would tell me they knew where I was going, they knew where I would be on set day and time and date. Then they would discuss which one of them would go over there to murder me, to attack me. Quickly, few days later, the threats, they extrapolated the online environment. They started posting around my home address, my personal data, my relatives' personal data. They were all shared online. My relatives were threatened too. And then I started getting packages at my home that contained, they were supposed to make me feel psychologically shaken or affected. So they contained things as diverse as worms, sex shop items, T-shirts with my pictures and non-flattering sentences on it, leashes with my name on it. My editor, the one that decided not to publish the article in the first place, they decided to not work with me anymore. And I had to leave home for a few weeks and search help of a professional organization to get my life back, which is Article 19, by the way. Thank you. It's been a few months since that happened. Things are getting increasingly better. To these days, I still get attempts to hack my Facebook account, my Twitter account. I guess this whole process got me closer to covering social issues and minority issues, feminism, and that's a good outcome I got from it. But I also think it made me feel a bit scared whenever I try to pitch a new story, if that story is going to make me go through everything again. So it's really hard to analyze the question from a perspective where I am a communicator. So I need to advocate for freedom of speech, because that concerns my profession. It also concerns everything I believe in, but also other people's freedom of speech. It's limiting my freedom of speech. And I don't think any communication professional should be scared of talking or of writing about any subject. So that's what I've been trying to pursue, I guess. So that's it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ana.
Thanks.
We have been following the development of Ana's case since it happened, and apart from the importance of listening to someone who's actually been through that, which I think is essential in a discussion like this, I think your report, it raises a subject that's oftentimes dismissed in this discussion, especially when it's framed within the versus framework, which is how harassment and online abuse can actually affect the freedom of speech of women themselves, who want to express themselves on the internet. And I think Daphne was also addressing that. So thank you very much. I'll hand over now to Bia Barbosa.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so
Can you
much.
please put Bia's slides?
Yeah, just wait a little bit. I'm going to say a few things before. Okay. Thank you for inviting Intervozes to be with you this afternoon. Intervozes is a civil society organization here in Brazil that for the last 12 years have been fighting for freedom of expression and media democratization in Brazil. And we think that this subject that we're dealing with is one of the major challenges for those who consider human rights defenders, and including women's rights and freedom of expression, and also for those who advocate for a free, open, and plural internet. First, I would like to reinforce what Gabriela just said, that freedom of expression is not an absolute right, and no human rights are absolute. So there must be balance with other fundamental rights. Of course, in different environments, there are different treatments of this. If you're talking about broadcasting media, it's one kind of treatment. If you're talking about internet, it's another treatment that we should address. But balance must be ensured And that means that we should not, as Erica said, it's difficult because everybody said a lot of things that I was supposed to say. Not I was supposed, but I wanted to say. That we should not address these issues in a perspective of contradiction, but in a perspective of balance. Another point I'd like to highlight is that organizations like ours, or like the organizations that are here following the sessions, we have an important task in approaching two different worlds that are not in permanent dialogue, in my point of view. We need to show, for example, in countries like Brazil, that traditional human rights organizations that do not discuss internet in a broad perspective, that anonymity is a right, that any content removed must come after, for example, court decisions, that mass surveillance is a threat to any democracy, and that there are ways to sanction those who propagate hate speech and advocate violence against women without violating the privacy of users in general. But at the same time, we need to dialogue with sectors that working on internet do not admit any kind of withdrawal of content, that consider exceptions as the one we have here in Marco Civil, the Brazilian Bill of Internet Bill of Rights related to revenge porn, for example, a violation of online civil rights. I agree that we need to solve this problem following an educational, technological, and cultural approach so we can have a safer and open internet for all. But while these two universes keep working separated, not acting together to defend democratic practice that guarantee this balance between freedom of expression and women's rights, what will happen is in an open space for episodes like this one that I would like to show, that at least here in Brazil have become more and more recurring. So this is a campaign from the Human Rights Ministry here in Brazil, calling for a process of let's humanize the web. And the idea was, how can you can also. Okay. The idea was I support the respects on the web or positive messages, and to receive and to be an open space to receive denounces of human rights violation on the web. What happens is that, next one please, a response like this that deshumanize the web, called by a comedian here in Brazil that has 11 million followers on Facebook, to get down the campaign from the Human Rights Ministry in Brazil with, I don't have to describe the image. So things like this, if sex is already good when the woman wants, imagine when she does not. This is from a website as well. This is not rape. If you do not want, she would say something. And this is a Ford advertisement. Leave your problems behind. So, and it was not only published in Brazil, but in other countries. And things like this that we have all the time as well. Homosexual should be used as human. How do you say that in English? Experiment. Yeah, it's human speaking. Yeah. Guinea pigs? Guinea pigs. Guinea pigs. You say that in English? I thought it was a literal, not working translation. It's okay. And we have, of course, many corrective rape pages and blogs spreading in a very quick way, where the victims, the lesbian, the bisexual women, and transgender people, which calls for intention for the criminals enforcing them to change their sexual orientation. A hospital here in São Paulo, in Brazil, specializing in violence against women, recorded at least one case of corrective rape by month in São Paulo. So it's quite, to finish, because I have passed my time, I just would like to say something about what happened here yesterday in IGF, when members of our organization, Intervozes, had the badges retained by the UN security, preventing them to come back to the event after demonstration with some banners in the opening ceremony. And this morning, the badges were finally returned after negotiations that we have with the UN security, where we said that it was a disproportionate reaction, and we call for the importance of preserving a democratic and participatory nature of the IGF. So we would like to thank the Brazilian Steering Committee that helped us to solve this, and many, many civil society organizations that were with us to try to solve this problem. But we think that the path to the consolidation of a diverse and participatory governance of the internet must be building in a context that where we believe that a legitimate freedom of expression is necessary. Otherwise, we won't preserve the democratic environment as public forums as IGF. So we thank everybody that support us, and we thank for this space.
Thank you, Bia. Thank you for bringing concrete examples. I think that helps a lot. We're running a bit out of time, but I confirm that we can have extra 10 minutes because we also started 10 minutes late, so I hope that's okay. If it's not, just tell us. And I'll also ask Paz and then Hiba to really stay within their time so that we can have at least a little bit of discussion. So please, Paz.
I think we need to distinguish two things. First, we need to acknowledge that online harassment is a problem for women on internet, especially in patriarchal countries like those in Latin America. But a very different thing is what the governments are doing with that problem and how they could use the excuse of online harassment as a tool for censorship. That doesn't mean that women suffering harassment or women and gender organizations working on this issue are promoting censorship. As Erika, I think this has to be stated because very often I'm hearing that kind of confusions. In that context, the solutions for online harassment to women are not necessarily in opposition of freedom of expression, in the same way that privacy, for example, is not the opposition of security. Having said that, can be the solutions to violence against women online problematic for freedom of expressions? Yes, of course, as all the bills and laws can be. How? Well, there are panelists in here that have explained better than me some of these tensions as possible clashes between definitions of hate speech and online harassment, or prosecution of anonymity, which is one of the key pillars of freedom of expression, or make intermediary liable of third parties' content. But there is also another key issue that can affect freedom of expression on internet, which is produced when public policies don't have a proper gender approach and therefore reinforce gender stereotypes that don't challenge economic and cultural power structures. In this sense, public policies have to address the problem not just with legal reforms, but also in educational, cultural, and economical terms. Finally, another thing that is needed is to build bridges between digital rights organizations and women and gender organizations in order to understand the possible tensions and work in better public policies. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you so much for bringing public policy into the debate, not only in the legal perspective. So, Hiba, please.
Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for being here during your lunch hour to talk about this issue. It's obviously something that is very top of mind right now, and basically one of the reasons that I'm here and one of the reasons that Google cares about this issue is that we want the internet to be a place where everybody can feel safe and comfortable and every kind of community can thrive. If the internet is just a place for a certain subset of people, that's not the internet we want. That's not the internet that is good for the company either. So that's kind of why we're here today. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about our high-level kind of public policy approaches to this problem, go a little bit into the product-specific, what's allowed, what's not allowed, how are things taken down, things like that. Talk a little bit about some of the tensions that my panelists identified about, free expression, free speech, how to make sure that we have balanced solutions that don't just blanket restrict all sorts of content. And then identify some possible solutions and talk a little bit about something that you raised about how to address some of the offline roots of these issues, because often these issues are kind of rooted in offline power imbalances. And so you can get rid of all of the online content, but those kind of inequalities and the repressive offline structures are still there. So we kind of view that as part and parcel of the solution to this issue. So, you know, I think we're all here today because we believe that the internet and social media can be a positive and empowering space, especially for marginalized communities. It can be a place where people can really find the sort of empowerment and find their voices, especially when they don't have that privilege in the offline world. So our goal is to really figure out how to promote that sort of positive community and speech while also minimizing the negative stuff and ensuring safety and freedom from harassment. Because as many of my panelists have identified, you know, if somebody feels like they can't speak safely online, you know, that's also a free expression issue. So basically, at a very high level, we don't think it's appropriate for an intermediary, a company, to determine what is or isn't offensive. That's not the role that we want to play, because what is offensive in one place to one person to one community could be, it's very different, it's very subjective, and it depends a lot on context. And honestly, it depends a lot not just on context and culture, but on the individual itself, his or herself. So what we do is we rely on users to flag content. That varies across the platforms. On YouTube, you can flag a video. On Blogger, you can request that things get removed, things like that. There's a legal removals page for search results. So our kind of goal is to make it as easy and intuitive as possible to flag objectionable content. I will be the first to admit that this is a huge challenge for us. I think some of the biggest challenges are building scalable systems, because there's so many users around the world flagging so much content that the sheer scale is often incredibly tough to deal with. Understanding context, as I mentioned, it's really difficult because we don't want to crack down on, for example, consensual sexual imagery is okay, you know, and then there are a lot of people on this panel, I'm sure, who would agree that we don't want to crack down on sexual expression just writ large. That would be harmful for a lot of communities online. So understanding context, and then, you know, recognizing ways to work with offline partners, especially offline partners around the world. So local women's organizations, human rights organizations who understand the local context, have been working in this space for decades, and really make sure that we have those partnerships going. So one kind of example of a recent policy change that we've had, based actually on a lot of civil society feedback and a lot of partner feedback, is we no longer allow revenge porn on search results on any of our platforms. And so basically what kind of prompted this decision is that we realized that this content doesn't really serve any purpose aside from the degradation of victims. And so unlike a lot of the right to be forgotten initiatives that you see in Europe, unlike a lot of that stuff, this policy is narrow, and it's designed to have minimal impact on free expression. It's basically an extension of our policies that surrounding like personally identifiable information. So we don't allow people to post people's, you know, bank account numbers and things like that. So it falls into that category of very sensitive information that shouldn't be easy to find online. So I think a lot of my co-panelists have done an amazing job at highlighting some of the free expression issues at stake here. And I do think that framing this as not a binary, but sort of a balance, but also a balance between different types of speech and different people's right to expression. So we're keeping that in mind as we think about solutions. In addition to a lot of in addition to kind of making tools easier to use and more intuitive, having local partnerships with traditional human rights women's organizations. We're also focusing a lot on digital safety and security, and also digital literacy, making sure that when people are posting online, they fully understand the implications of their post, that they're able to control their data, that they're able to kind of have the knowledge of how this information could be shared online. And we're, especially for young girls who may or may not be thinking long-term about their digital footprint or digital legacy, making sure that people know that you know, things could be shared outside of your control. we've also really worked on a lot of counter speech efforts. When I was talking about this on Monday, somebody mentioned, or it might have been earlier today, yeah, somebody mentioned that, counter speech is all fine and good, but you have to realize that not everybody is equally privileged offline and online. So kind of figuring out how to empower voices while keeping existing inequalities in mind and trying to really address those. It's hard, and there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but we have found it really, really effective, not just in this area, but also when it comes to countering violent extremism and hate speech and some of those other areas. So I think I want to wrap up. I know I'm running out of time, and I'd be happy to talk with any of you on more kind of product-specific stuff. But at the end of the day, we don't allow content that promotes or condones violence or has the primary purpose of inciting hatred on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, gender, race, ethnic origin, age, nationality, veteran status. So that's kind of the approach. Obviously, the implementation varies a lot, and that's where things get tricky, and I'm happy to talk more about that. Finally, I think that a lot of the solutions that my panelists identified really get to the crux of the point, which is like, you can't address this from one point of view. You can't have a purely technical solution or a purely legal solution or a purely policy solution. It has to be a multi-stakeholder and also multi-sectoral effort to deal with this.
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry that we're so short of time. I think we deserved like 1 extra hour to discuss this. But I'll also ask if you have any questions. We'll give space to maximum 3 people to make very, very short questions or comments. I'll be very strict on that. And then we can come back and have also brief answers. And sorry, maybe continue the conversation in the corridors. So is there a microphone that we could hand to? Okay, so you must come.
Yes, mics travel, as do the voice.
Thanks. Very quick. It is a shame that it is so few time for this table. What I want to say is that rights should not be empiric independent. I mean, they are not separated from practice, neither when they are created nor in the way they are exercised. And what I think is that in patriarchal countries and with these minority situations in which the context shows that they are harassed and that they are constantly assaulted as women or gay or lesbian or trans people, the way in which we think rights and the way in which we assess rights should be different. Because even, for example, in the case of incitation of violence, even when it is thought to be a high standard to be proved, in countries such as Mexico or Argentina or others of Latin America, it is not so different to have offenses against women and incitation of violence in those cases. Context should be much more important than it is right now.
Okay, good. Who else wanted to speak? Okay. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Vladimir. Air Treaty.
My name is Sonigitu Ekpe from Nigeria. Mine is, what is the level of awareness and can there be differences between choices and rights?
Do you understand the question? No, Could you maybe clarify your question?
Yes. My question is, can we differentiate between choices and rights? And then the first one initially was, what is the level of awareness, especially among young girls, to avoid violence or infringement? Because in Africa, we have a lot of challenge. The ladies are almost not informed. They don't know what they deserve, so they don't know how to go about it. So how do we?
Okay.
Thank you.
Good, thank you. Is there anyone else that wants to make a short answer? Okay. And then I'll give everyone like 30 seconds to answer and make final remarks.
I'm Gisela from Derechos Digitales. Thank you very much for this wonderful panel. I have two specific questions that I'd love to hear your comments on, especially with the revenge porn mechanism that Google now has. In APC Women, and Eric specifically has made a lot of emphasis other times on this, they prefer to call it the non-consensual dissemination of intimate images. But that opens the door a lot. So I was wondering, what are your criteria in Google regarding this aspect? And the second is just a general remark about the IGF, and to, I mean, all the people that are here listening. When we touch these topics, I think there's a barrier of conversation that regards mansplaining. So I just want to put that on the table and call it by its name, because it's very difficult, even in multi-stakeholder forums like this, to overcome these barriers and be able to speak as equals, but we are getting there. So those are just my one specific question and the other remark. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you very much. So can we start by Daphne, by answering and final remarks?
Well, I fully agree with the idea that freedom of expression shouldn't collide with women's rights, and you know, this need to go on advancing in our rights, and the need to go on sharing all this information and getting people aware of what's going on. Doesn't mean that feminists want censorship, as like Erica said. So I think it's very good to be here, all of us, discussing all this. Very good for IGF to have opened these possibilities. So I think we should go on discussing and thinking of, as we said, public policies, thinking about intermediate liability and all the issues involved in that, and thinking also of our own freedom to express ourselves, no? So,
Thank you. Pass. 30 seconds.
Thank you. Yes, as Vladimir pointed out, the online harassment, it is different in different countries, and in that sense, it will be great if, for example, Google can have a public report about the porn revenge measures that they are taking, because it will be great to have evidence to understand the difference of this problem in different countries, in different regions around the world. Thank you.
So yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank you guys for being here, discussing the issue. I guess it's the most important part of being here is actually the fact that there's been a lot of you mentioned before that during IGF we've been discussing gender violence online a lot more than we expected, and that's the fundamental thing, I guess, because it's the awareness being properly raised. I guess it's no one can ignore it anymore. So, and then we can go straight forward to actions, like proper actions with Iba here. So that's I see that as very positive. I hope no one in a future somewhere not very far away, I hope things like what happened to me are less and less common in Brazil and elsewhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anna, for coming. So Hiba.
Thank you so much. I just want to address the what I can of the two questions. One is, I think the first one really addressed the need for more digital literacy training. I think a lot of people often come online without, and I think we think of it as part of our responsibility too, you know, to make sure that people know how to use tools and technology adequately instead of just having it dropped, you know, in and piecing out. So that's something that we're really working on a lot. The second part, I think we're still working on what exactly constitutes revenge porn, but the kind of core kernel is the non-consensual aspect. And I'd be happy, and I would actually love to chat with you more about like defining it more clearly, indicators that we should be looking for and things like that.
Gabrielle.
Well, on the first point about the notion of harassment and has been considered and the context, just like to point out that in relation to incitement to violence, under the ICCPR, the context is very important. There's the Rabat Plan of Action that specifically says that the context is very important to take into account who the speaker is and a range of other factors. On revenge porn, I think I mean, generally speaking, I would agree it's a breach of privacy. I think it also raises all sorts of different issues depending on how the particular, like the approach to revenge porn. In some countries, it's criminalization. So what does that mean? How's the offense phrased? There are all sorts of factors that come into play. And also, like, and one of them, I think, in some places, is if it's drafted too broadly, what does that mean, for example, for the reporting by, okay, it's not high-flying journalism necessarily, but kiss and tell stories? What does that mean for women who may engage in a relationship with powerful individuals? So I think sometimes, although in very narrow cases, these are aspects that should be taken into account. Thank you.
Let's go. Well, and as we know, when women are using their agency and their bodies to express themselves as subjects, they're the first to be caught up in decency laws. And in fact, many of the revenge porn laws have been used against women who are freely and happily expressing their sexuality. So it's an excellent point. And you don't have to be involved with a powerful figure to have that problem. I think there's a lot of elements. I think that the question of mobbing is a really difficult thing. Each one in and on its own is maybe not an expression, a violation of anyone's freedom of expression, but when you get to the swarm, when you get to the mob, there's a problem. And that's not something that needs to be criminalized. That's not something, but there needs to be a way to work with internet intermediaries to address it. I think that's a big issue to uncrack more and talk about more, because even if each and every message is not a threat, the fact of your having to individually deal with that many from that many different sources is a problem. And there are mobbing against all sorts of people. A lot of it is gender-based, and that doesn't just mean against women. I think another really important thing regarding what Paz was saying, and I really want to push this because there is so much polarization around this particular issue, and some different feminists have a lot of different viewpoints about what they feel is okay to be online and what they feel is okay in terms of threatening expression. And many have taken stands of absolutely no tolerance for normalization of violence. And there's a structural reason as to why they've gotten to that stance, right? So it is not helpful if our beloved internet rights activists and others, as Paz is saying, don't also get pissed off along with the rest of us. And we really need to attack that polarization together from many different spheres. I guess I'll stop there.
So just restrain, we need to avoid the polarization, and we need to build bridges. So I think this is the way that we should deal with that. I'm from here, and unfortunately, for example, the traditional women's rights organizations that are here in Paraíba are not here in IGF. So, and when we go to, when we internet organization go to the traditional human rights spaces, we are only us. One, two, three people. So I think this is one really goal that we should follow for the next period, because otherwise we won't solve anything polarizing or leaving each one working in his universe separated. So thank you so much.
I remember what I was going to add, and it was what Bishaka Datta said in another session. I think it's really important to put out here. We need to also be talking a lot more about sexual freedom of expression. And consent.
So thank you so much, everyone. Let's give the table an applause. I feel we really gathered a very interesting mixture of people from different backgrounds, and there were really important presentations here, so I thank you very much. It was extremely interesting. Thank you for making this debate possible. And one last thing that I'd like to tell you is that tomorrow at lunchtime, there's the Just Watch Lounge, which this year is about gender and the internet. So
sexual rights.
Sexual rights, exactly.
By the way.
by the way. And we also left some material about our research over there in case you're interested. We would love to have your feedback. Thank you so much.